Welcome to the Capital Workspaces podcast. We showcase members, entrepreneurs, small businesses and startups in Bethesda and the greater Washington, D.C. metropolitan area. Today's show is hosted by lawyer and author Rob Brown. We interview Capital Workspaces member, speaker, educator and author, Caroline Adams Miller. This podcast was produced and recorded in Capital Workspaces Podcast Studio, Bethesda, Maryland.
Hello and welcome to the very first episode of the Capital Workspaces Business Podcast. My name is Rob Brown, your host, and today our first guest is Caroline Adams Miller. Caroline is one of the world's leading experts on the science behind successful goal setting and the use of good grit to achieve hard things. A Harvard graduate with a master's in applied positive psychology from the University of Pennsylvania, she has authored 6 books including Creating Your Best Life, Getting Grit, My Name is Caroline, and Positively Caroline. She teaches at Wharton Business School's Executive Education Program, and her work has been featured in hundreds of international media sources, including the New York Times, the Washington Post, BBC, NPR, and CNN. Caroline, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me for your inaugural broadcast.
We have been working very hard behind the scenes, and we're now putting it into fruition. Why do you focus on goal setting and grit in your work?
I focus a lot on goal setting in particular because one of the things I learned at University of Pennsylvania in that very first class in 2005, there were only 34 of us from around the world learning about the science of happiness. And there was a slam dunk finding presented that year, brand new, that showed that all success in life is preceded by being happy first. And growing up in Washington, going to Harvard, kind of being in some high pressure situations with swimming and other things, I had always been taught or told implicitly or explicitly that you become happy after you succeed. So the goal was always to succeed first and then, somehow you're going to be happy later. So this really turned my life upside down. And so that was part of it, and that was behind my 5th book, Creating Your Best Life. I wrote the first research-driven, evidence-based goal-setting book ever published, and that's when I realized the world really didn't have access to science when it came to setting and achieving goals. So that was one of the biggest reasons. The second is the backstory, and the backstory is I nearly died from bulimia 35 years ago, and I became the first person ever to get better and to talk publicly about it, and to give people hope that you could do this unthinkable thing, which we thought everyone would just die from. And that was the biggest goal I've ever tackled and succeeded at. And so my life has really been defined by and saved by picking really big goals and then finding a way to get to the finish line. So it matters to me from a professional perspective, but also from a personal perspective.
And I imagine that you talk to a lot of people that do have big goals and want to achieve great things, have a lot of aspirations, but they have no idea how to get there.
It's amazing how little knowledge there is. And I work with a lot of companies and CEOs and high-level executives all over the world. And they tell me that they've been given these really big goals. They're not sure where they come from. They're not sure what they're based on, but their performance, their bonus pay, everything depends upon them achieving those goals, but they don't know how to do it. They end up giving up or feeling overwhelmed if there are no resources in the organization to help them learn or master flatten a learning curve, especially if it's a learning goal, and that's something we can get into because there's 2 kinds of goals. And so I think that if people don't have access to this really key knowledge in a world where I think people feel overwhelmed and hopeless at times about what they see around them, if you don't know how to set, pursue, and achieve goals with the best of science supporting you, then I don't see how people get a foothold in their lives or even know what they're capable of accomplishing. So I'm completely committed to getting the science of goal-setting theory and supporting theories out to the world.
Well, it's much needed. And you mentioned earlier that you work with a lot of executives, so you do executive coaching.
Yes.
First, what is executive coaching, and then how did you get into it?
Good question. So executive coaching is when you work with usually executives, maybe almost always executives, but there are executive coaches who also do personal coaching clients on the side. But when you go into an organization and you're working with executives, usually around leadership skills, which also involve goal setting, and so the company usually pays your bill, but you're working with teams, you're working with executives. Often I work with CEOs, and there's really interesting statistic that came out of Harvard Business Review this year showing that something like 68% of CEOs who ascend to the CEO chair feel completely overwhelmed and unable to accomplish the goals in front of them, but they don't know who to talk to. And that's when they often rely on a coach. And I hear that all the time.
Do they sometimes talk to other CEOs, or is that like...
They do. Well, they do. It's really, it's such a good question, too. Yes, they do. There are organizations set up that are very white male dominated, like YPO and EO, and they have forums, and they're well organized. But a lot of the women who are CEOs don't always feel comfortable in those settings. So a lot of the female CEOs or high-level executives don't always feel like that's the right place for them. But there are also CEOs who don't want to let other CEOs know that they don't know how to go through a merger. They don't know how to change bonus pay. They don't know how to even read financials. I mean, I have a secret weapon, a guy I send to CEOs who helps them demystify annual reports and other things like that, because they're really good visionaries and they know how to motivate people. They build their followers' self-efficacy by inspirational talks and the rest of it, but they don't always understand the money part. And so sometimes I'm the secret conduit to get them the kinds of people they need in their lives to understand what they're doing.
And I've met a lot of people like that who are phenomenal visionaries. I mean, they can come up with an idea that is absolutely amazing, but when it comes to the implementation and the execution part and parsing down and looking at the analytics, like they're completely lost.
Oh, gosh. I could tell you a million stories, but I'm so bound by confidentiality. But what it takes to get here isn't what you need to get there. Is the very famous comment. I just butchered that comment, but what it took to get here isn't always what it takes to get there. So the visionaries, the ones who are the Richard Bransons of the world, they can start a company, and they're visionaries. And I use the VIA Strengths Profile to kind of unpack people's character strengths from 1 to 24. But those aren't always the abilities that you need to marshal people to get. Let's say I'm working with 2 companies right now where the founders were great at getting founded, but when it came to getting the financials in order, kind of improving profit centers, dealing with pivots, they couldn't do it, so they brought in a turnaround guy. And the turnaround guy or girl is the one who's actually whipping discipline and marketing and other kinds of things in place. They read things better. So you have to know when to step away and not have stupid grit. I mean, stupid grit are the founders who don't know when to pivot and don't know when to step away and let somebody with a different kind of knowledge base step in and help them.
So they're somewhat static. Like they're just like, no, I'm going down this road and I'm not going to pivot. I'm not going to change.
Yeah, you asked me about grit in my first in the first question. So I wrote a book called Getting Grit because I realized after I wrote Creating Your Best Life, this book on how to set and pursue goals, which actually is being reissued in December because they just found it sold 100,000 books. So now they're reissuing it in December. But as part of writing that book, what I realized is the happiest people set, pursue, and achieve hard goals, not easy goals, hard goals. The happiest people have hard goals, which begs the question, what does it take to accomplish hard goals? So there's this whole new science. Again, the epicenter of this was Penn again. And so Angela Duckworth's research on grit was about the secret sauce to success is really this quality of grit, passion and persistence in pursuit of long-term goals. But where her research ended and my work began was how do you get grit? And in a world where millennials, my kids in particular, were given trophies for just waking up, they were told they were winners just because they went to school and showed up in class, and they all expected B's for just showing up. I mean, that's the metrics changed, the playgrounds changed. I've got to tell you, it's just a dumbed down world out there where everyone was told they were a winner. The issue became, how do you get grit? And so that's one of the things that I've really been working with people on is how do you actually cultivate the qualities that you need in order to do the hardest things and get to the finish line.
So we've talked about that you work with executives. Are those basically your typical clients, or does it just kind of run the gamut?
It is mostly executives. I've had personal clients. If anyone's listening to this who's been a personal client who's not in a big corporation, it's certainly not to say that they haven't been important to me. They've all been important to me. But primarily what I find is the companies that want to invest in really high-level coaching, not just a life coach or not just somebody who just got their credential. I've really sweated bullets and spent hundreds of hours learning the science and the theories behind goal setting and motivation and self-efficacy theory and social contagion theory and the rest of it. And if you're going to get someone who knows that, you're going to pay more. Companies can pay more.
So when people set goals, and lots of times people set goals like New Year's resolutions, I'm going to lose weight, or I'm going to finally get this degree, I'm going to write this book, and they start out pretty strong.
Yep.
And then
Yep.
a little while later, then they just kind of completely abandon it.
Yes.
What is one of the biggest factors contributing to them just kind of throwing up their hands and saying, listen, this is just not worth it?
A couple. Great question. First of all, I don't know if you know this, but the third Monday of January is called Blue Monday. It's the saddest Monday of the year. Why? Because it's this trifecta of horrible things. One is most of the weather is still really bad unless you live in Australia where it's summertime. So weather's really bad. Credit card statements are arriving from overspending during the holidays. And the third is that most people have abandoned their goals. And so they feel like losers and the money's bad. I mean, the money is, the bills are rolling in and they feel, like, gosh, when is it spring? So it's a really tough time when people realize I haven't pursued or achieved my goals. And why do they not achieve their goals? First of all, there's this weird idea that New Year's resolutions don't work. The research is pretty clear that people who set and pursue resolutions do far better than people who set no goals. So that's number one. Number two, biggest mistake I see is that people have very vague goals. Like, I want to feel better. I want to be a better golfer by September. I want to lose weight. I want to create a great engineering culture in my company. These are all fuzzy goals. But why do people set fuzzy goals? I interviewed and have gotten to know the co-founder of goal setting theory. Yes, there's goal setting theory. I was startled and stunned to realize that every goal setting book I had in my shelf that I was using with clients, Brian Tracy, Zig Ziglar, they were all crap because none of them had research in it. So I found out there's this thing called goal setting theory. Edwin Locke and Gary Latham, both still alive, had devised this unbelievable theory, open theory, proven in hundreds of studies. I found this while I was at Penn. I'm thinking, why doesn't the world know this goal-setting theory? So what did Gary Latham, the co-founder of goal-setting theory, tell me? He said, Caroline, the reason why people lowball their goals is because nobody wants to feel bad about themselves. Everybody wants to feel like a winner. So they set goals with really fuzzy metrics that you can't really measure. And there's a saying in goal-setting theory, that which cannot be measured cannot be achieved. If you can't measure your progress towards a goal, then you can't achieve it. And so that's one of the reasons people fail at New Year's resolutions. There's no way to measure success. And another one is that people set goals that are just too high, too aggressive. And what we find is, particularly if you've set a performance goal, like I need to have this thing done by June 1st, but it's a learning goal, something you've never done before, what you find is people spin around, they do a few things that have worked before with other goals, then they get overwhelmed, they often don't have the humility to ask for help, two kinds of humility, by the way, social and intellectual, and they give up and they disengage. And when you look at the disengagement in the workplace, 80% of workers say they're disengaged. A lot of times it's because goals have not been properly set within the workplace and people have no access to the resources to help them either understand, pursue, or achieve their goals. So it all comes back to the fundamentals of, if you don't know how to set your goals, you're going to fail in every way, emotionally, physically, financially. It has to be taught in every elementary school in the world.
It should be. I didn't know there was even a such thing as like goal setting.
Bingo.
Theory. I did not know.
Yeah. No, when this was an assignment that was given to me in October of 2005. I was an executive coach. Mm-hmm. My website talked about, I can't even believe this is true, but I'll say it because it's true. I had the Harvard study of 1950 on my website because it was in a Brian Tracy book, and it said that people who wrote their goals down were only 3% of the Harvard class of 1950, and they were the ones who'd gone out and achieved all their goals, and that 60% of the class had written their goals or not written their goals, and they'd gotten this far. Anyway, I thought it was research. I get to Penn, and I get this assignment, and I think, wait a minute, there's science here? So I went back to this Brian Tracy book, and I'm flipping through it frantically. My hands are shaking. There's no footnote. There's no evidence. I start chasing it down. I find out everything from Tony Robbins, whatever, it's all urban legends. Companies have been built on urban legends and snake oil. So I went to Temple, not far from Penn. I checked out a book called Goal Setting Theory, 500 pages. I Xeroxed every page. And I went home and I studied it. And I went to Marty Seligman, the father of positive psychology. And I said, Marty, I'm going to do my capstone on goal-setting theory and that research that showed that happiness precedes all success, not vice versa. He's like, oh, but we got to fix the healthcare system. Why don't you do healthcare for your capstone? It's like, nope, the world needs to know that there's a science to goal-setting. And he's like, okay, go ahead and do it. And now, 12 years after that book came out, it was my capstone. 12 years later, I find it was just named the #1 book for goal-setting in 2020. On Thrive Global, but it's being reissued, and I'm still the only book that has goal-setting theory in it. It's like the world doesn't know goal-setting theory. It's like, why is that? Why is all this stuff stuck in academia? And when I look at how unhappy the world is, we have all these figures showing that, we're getting sadder and sadder, and people feel overwhelmed, they feel poor, they feel helpless, they look at CNN, every headline is the world is coming to an end. And I know that if people had access to this science, they would know where to start in their lives to pursue and achieve the right goals. Not any goals, the right goals. And that's my mission in life, that's my purpose.
Is that what your next book is about?
Yes.
Let's talk about your next book.
So I was driving a used truck to Houston a couple weeks ago. That's a long story too, but it was a surprise for my 30-year-old son. Found a used truck, drove it there. Somewhere between North Carolina and Louisiana, my book agent called. He goes, Caroline, they just fixed the accounting system at Barnes & Noble, and guess what? Your book sold 100,000 copies. So they want to reissue it in December, and you need to write a new introduction. I said, well, that's great, but I'm writing another goal-setting book now because that other book's a little out of date. The research is new in different areas. And he said, well, let's pitch it to them. And that's what I'm in the middle of. I'm pitching a series of goal-setting books to Barnes & Noble, and they're voting on it like this week. And I want to do a series of books basically called, I want it to be 100 pages, like Who Moved My Cheese? And it's a goal-setting guide for everybody who wants to set, pursue, and achieve goals. And it's going to be goal setting for leaders, goal setting for teens, goal setting for athletes, goal setting for anybody. Everyone needs to know it, and they need to be able to read the research and have worksheets in 2 hours. It's a 2-hour book. And smaller is harder, but that's what I'm doing.
Well, it sounds really exciting, and I can't wait for these books to come out. When they do, please let me know.
Oh, can I come back?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely.
I'm
want you
in.
to come back. Now, we are basically in a time of historical shifting. Specifically, when you talk about goal setting, how can goal setting help women?
Okay. All right. This is where I'm going to get really controversial. So, Me Too, Time's Up, these are all way overdue. What I feel strongly about as the world's been spinning and women have found their voices and found more empowerment, what I'm daring to talk about now is the thing of that which you do not speak if you're a woman, and that is other women often hold women back. And so just as I think a lot of these movements around what have men done to hold women back, to sexually harass them, to use the court system against them in divorces and all those things need to be taken care of and discussed. They're really legitimate and overdue. However, the thing that I hear most from women is we need to talk about the fact that women don't support other women, and it's the invisible hand that holds women back. And I believe there's several reasons why we undermine other women, but I also think there are at least 4 solutions to it, because I didn't want to start talking about it until I had solutions, because I don't want to just be a problem talker. So I cogitated on this for several years, and I realized there's cultural reasons why women don't support other women. I'll just give you one, the Disney rule. People don't know that at Disney, illustrators are told if you're going to draw a princess in an image, then there's another princess in the same picture, they can't look in the same direction. One has to look to the left and one has to look to the right. Why? Because you can't have 2 sparkly women in the same picture. And if they're looking in the same direction, it means they're in the same room, and that can't be. So we're primed from a very early age as girls to think only one woman can sparkle. Another one is stereotype threat. When women dare to act out of role and not be submissive and kind and nurturing, the first people who come after them are other women. And it's called the black sheep effect. They're ostracized. And the oldest form of cultural punishment that exists, religious or cultural punishment, is you get thrown out of a tribe. And so women throw other women out of the tribe when they dare to be ambitious or proud or succeed. So there's a number of reasons, but what are the solutions? I think, first of all, we have to amplify other women's successes. This happened in the Obama White House. There is a role model for this. What they decided ahead of time is if we went into a meeting with Obama and other senior leaders and a woman had an idea, they found that mansplaining took over. The men took credit for their women's ideas. So the women got together and they said, oh, Betsy had a great idea. Let's talk about Betsy's idea. And they would put her name on her idea. And I find that women don't always amplify other women's successes. So I've introduced a new word, ampliship. I don't think it's about mentorship and sponsorship. It's about, do you support and amplify other women's ideas and successes with witnesses or not? Because you can do mentorship and sponsorship with no witnesses. And I think if we aren't uplifting other women, then I don't think our work will be found, our products will not be purchased, and we'll never have the economic power that we need. Because we're going backwards. We're not even stalled. We're going backwards. So that has to change. And I think we have to speak of that which cannot be spoken of. And that's got to be discussed more openly.
Sounds like we got a lot of work ahead of us.
I think so.
Absolutely. Well, I know everyone who's watching and listening definitely want to learn more about you, so I want to make sure we get your contact information out. You can learn more about Caroline at Twitter, at Caroline M. Coach, Instagram, at cmcoaching, LinkedIn, Caroline Adams Miller. Her website is www.carolinemiller.com, and on Linktree, linktr.ee/cmcoaching. Caroline, once again, thank you so much for being on our show.
For the first one.
Thank you. And thank you for tuning in to our inaugural broadcast. My name is Rob Brown, and this is the Capital Workspaces Business Podcast. We'll see you next time.